The driver of the black Land Cruiser saw her first. He had been watching the 7:14 a.m. gridlock on Broad Street in Lagos Island when a woman in a faded yellow dress lifted a plastic tray above her head, her arms perfectly straight, her body completely still against the noise and motion around it. She was not young. She moved through the space between the Danfo buses with the careful step of someone who had learned long ago that the ground could not always be trusted. On the tray, 12 loaves of bread in 2 rows, each wrapped in white nylon against the morning heat. The driver said nothing. He reached across the center console and tapped his employer on the knee. Khalid Adeyemi had been reading a contract. He looked up. He looked at the woman for 4 seconds. Then he told the driver to pull over. She would not recognize him yet. He had grown into someone broader and more settled than the boy she had last known, and she had trained herself long ago not to look at expensive cars. Looking invited complications she could not afford. But Khalid had recognized her in the first second in a way that went beyond the eyes. There was something in the air near her that he associated with the kitchen on Bourdillon Road, with safety, with a specific quality of being known that he had not felt since childhood. He would have recognized her anywhere. The way she carried that tray, arms straight, chin level, back upright against the Lagos morning, was the way she had always moved through rooms that underestimated her. He had watched that posture from the kitchen floor, from the back seat of school-run cars, from the doorway of the bedroom she had tucked him into every night from age 3 until age 14. Standing on the curb with the city loud and grinding around him, he understood that something in the architecture of the world had failed badly in the years since he had last seen it. Her name was Constance Owusu-Boat, and she was 67 years old. The last time she had stood on a scale, in March at the free clinic in Isel Echo, she had weighed 49 kilograms. The nurse had not said anything alarming. She had written the number down and looked up at Constance with the expression people used when they wanted to ask something they had not yet found the words for. Constance thanked her, folded the paper into her dress pocket, and walked the 4 kilometers home without stopping. The nurse had asked her to return in June. Constance had written the date in the margin of the first notebook she kept, beside the revenue column for that week, in the same even hand she used for everything. She had not told anyone about the 49 kilograms. It was not something she was ready to make into a conversation. She woke every morning at 4:30, not because an alarm woke her. She had not owned one since 2019, when the small radio she had used for 30 years stopped working and she did not replace it. Her body woke at that hour because it had been waking at that hour for 31 years, first in the house on Bourdillon Road in Ikoyi, where she had raised 3 children who were not her own, and now in the single room in Asale Iko she rented for 8,000 naira a month from a man named Mr. Dilhatu, who came every first Saturday to collect and had never once asked whether the amount was difficult. The room had one window that faced a wall. She had hung a piece of blue cloth across it, not for privacy, but because the afternoon light made reading difficult. She still read every day. 12 novels on the wooden shelf above her sleeping mat, arranged not alphabetically but by the year she had first read each one, the earliest being a copy of Things Fall Apart that had belonged to her late husband Samuel, with his name written inside in pencil, Samuel K. Owusu-Boateng, 1977. She had been carrying that book for 46 years, the way some people carry photographs. Her work dress was a faded yellow she had bought from Idumota Market for 1,200 naira 3 years earlier, when the bread business still felt like a temporary arrangement. The dress had been bright when she bought it. Now it was the color of old newspaper. It was clean. She washed it every 2 days in the metal bucket beside the door and hung it on the wire above the window while she slept in the blue house dress the Adeyemi family had given her as a Christmas gift in 2016. She smelled faintly of palm kernel soap and the cassava starch that clung to the bread wrappers from Mama Justina's kitchen. She had never worn the blue dress outside. It was not for outside. Before leaving each morning, she checked her tray. 12 loaves, 2 rows of 6, each wrapped in white nylon. She sourced them from Mama Justina on the next street, who baked starting at 2 a.m. and had the first batch ready by 4. Constance paid 280 naira per loaf and sold each for 400. On a good day, she moved all 12 and came home with 1,440 naira profit. On a bad day, she moved 4 or 5. The difference was weather, traffic, and something she could not name in English. A quality of the morning air that either made people reach into their pockets or keep their hands still. She was good at reading that quality. She had been reading people her entire working life. For 31 years on Bourdieu Road, she had read the Adeyemi household, the way a doctor reads vital signs, quietly, continuously, adjusting to what she found. She knew which child needed silence and which needed sound. She knew which evening of the week Emmanuel Adeyemi came home with trouble in his shoulders and had learned to have pepper soup ready on those evenings without being asked. She knew which combination of words could bring a screaming 4-year-old back from the edge without anyone losing dignity in the process. She kept 2 notebooks. The first was a daily ledger, income and expenditure going back to January of the year she started, written in the same precise hand she had used for the Bourdieu Road household accounts for 22 years. The second notebook was different. It held a single entry written on the night of her dismissal in the same careful hand. The entry recorded something Emmanuel Adeyemi had told her in his study on the evening of his 62nd birthday, something she had written down because it deserved a record, even if she was not then certain why. She had not opened that notebook since the night she wrote in it. She was holding the tray between 2 Danfo buses, counting her remaining loaves in her head, when the Land Cruiser pulled to the curb at 7:14 on that Thursday morning. She did not look at the car. The woman who had dismissed Constance from the house on Bourdieu Road was Emmanuel, Adeyemi's second wife, a Lagos lawyer named Adès Bright. She had married Emmanuel 14 months before he died and inherited both the house and the authority to make decisions about it. Her name appeared on a frosted glass door on the 4th floor of a building on Kingsway Road. A Bright, senior partner. She wore her dresses pressed and shook hands with the deliberate care of someone who understood that rooms were always watching. The dismissal had taken 12 minutes. Adès Bright had sat across from Constance at the dining table, the same table where Constance had served every meal for 31 years, and explained that a decision had been made to restructure the household staff. She used the word restructure 3 times. She placed a white envelope on the table and said it contained the terminal package. She did not say what the package was. She looked at her own hands while she spoke. The envelope held 45,000 naira. Constance had served that house for 31 years. She had never missed a Monday. She had worked through 3 separate illnesses she did not report because she did not want the children unsettled. She had worked through the morning in 2009 when the call came from Kumasi that her mother had died, and she had finished making the children's breakfast before she sat down on the kitchen stool and pressed her hand against her mouth and allowed herself 1 minute, not 2, 45,000 naira. The steward, Tunda, who had been in the house for 11 years, stood in the corridor doorway and watched. When Constance looked at him, he stepped back. The garden boy stayed on the far side of the compound. The gate man opened the gate without meeting her eyes, something he had never done in 11 years of opening it for her. She walked out with 1 bag inside, Samuel Zachabi novel, a red headscarf her mother had sent from Kumasi before she died, a photograph taken at the beach in 2003 when Khaled was 15 and had refused to look at the camera, smiling instead at something off to his left, the kind of smile that arrives before the person knows it is there. She left the 45,000 naira on the table, not because she didn't need it, because it was not the right number. She picked up the bag, pressed the book against her side through the canvas, and walked to the gate. The gate man opened it without ceremony. The street received her the way streets always do, without comment, into the noise and the ordinary motion of other people's days. She had decided before she walked out that she would not look back, and she kept that. The first 6 months were the months she would later describe only by what she had not done, not written to the children, not called Tunde, not stood on the pavement outside the gate the way she had sometimes seen other people do with places that had removed them. She found the room in Isala Iko through Mrs. Ifua Kwanzaa from her church, who had written the number on a scrap of paper with a nearly finished pencil, pressing hard to make the marks legible. Constance moved in on the 1st of the following month and began measuring the Zenith bank account she had opened in 2004, fed with small deposits. Over 22 years, 2,000 naira here, 5,000 there, whenever there was anything remaining after her own minimal needs. By the 10th month, the account held 61,000 naira. By the 13th month, it held 22,000. She began the bread business on a Tuesday in January. She borrowed Mama Justina's tray while she saved to buy her own and walked the 2 kilometers to Broad Street each morning because the traffic was reliable. The heat on Broad Street in February was the kind that settled on the skin like a damp cloth pressed and held. The exhaust from the buses made the air taste of metal. On the worst mornings, when the bread was not moving, when her arms ached from the tray and her feet ached from the concrete, she would count the remaining loaves, calculate the minimum she needed to break even, and then stand perfectly still and breathe through her mouth and wait. She had 49 kilograms to manage those mornings with. She managed them. On the 9th morning she stood at her pitch. A young woman who sold cold drinks from a cooler 2 meters to the south came over at 9:30 without being asked and handed her a cup of tea. She said nothing. She gave Constance the cup and returned to her cooler. Constance drank it standing up, holding it with both hands, and when she was done she returned the cup with care. The young woman's name was Adaeze, a different Adaeze entirely, and Constance noted the coincidence and found nothing in it she needed to carry. 8 meters to the north, a woman named Mrs. Pauline Asamoah ran a groundnut kiosk from a tin frame with a canvas top. She was 71 years old, with arms that looked like they had never stopped working and a habit of watching people's feet rather than their faces because she said feet told you more. She had watched Constance's feet every morning for 3 years. She knew something about this woman that Constance herself had never spoken aloud in all that time. She had been waiting for the right person to arrive and tell it to. When the man from the Land Cruiser crossed the street without hurrying, and Lagos traffic seemed to make space for him the way it does for people who move with purpose, Mrs. Pauline folded her arms across her chest and watched his face do the thing faces do when the past arrives without warning. She waited to see what kind of man he was. Constance recognized him at the 5th second. She lowered the tray. She said his name the way she had always said it, not as a greeting, not as a question, but as a statement of the simple fact that he existed. Khaled, he said her name. She squared her shoulders under the yellow dress. She had grown practiced at receiving the concern of people who knew her history, the lowered voices, the money offered in ways that required her to feel the giving. She had learned to stand straight through it. Khaled did not lower his voice. He did not explain himself or his presence or the expression on his face. He looked at the tray and then at her face and said, "Are you finished for this morning?" She told him she had 9 loaves left. He said, "Tell me how much for all 9. At your price, not mine." She told him 3,600 naira. He gave her 4,000 and told her to keep the difference. She placed the money in her pocket. She thanked him once, which was how she had always thanked people, once directly, without performance. She did not look away from his face, and he did not look away from hers. What she did not know yet, what Khaled himself had not yet fully understood, standing there on Broad Street in the February heat, was that buying 9 loaves of bread was the smallest of what he had come to do. If this story is already sitting somewhere behind your chest, stay with me, because what the old woman at the groundnut kiosk told him next is the part that Constance Owusu Boateng herself had never known. Mrs. Pauline Asamoah folded her canvas at 9, every Thursday when the individual sales dried up. She was working behind the kiosk frame when the man from the Land Cruiser appeared at its edge. She did not look up immediately. "Your father sent something to me," she said. October 2007. By hand, he knew me. He knew her. He knew that if something happened to him, she would leave the money on the table rather than take what was owed to her. She paused, which she did. She reached behind the back panel of the kiosk, a wooden board she kept there for structural support, and removed a folded piece of paper that had been folded and refolded until its creases had gone soft as cloth. He opened it with both hands, single page, Emmanuel Adeyemi and Associates letterhead. Blue ink, his father's handwriting, the narrow, slightly tilted letters he had known from birthday cards, from the margins of documents, from the notes tucked into his school bags when he was small. The date at the top, October 14, 2007. The letter was addressed to no one. It was a statement of intent, calm and detailed, that upon Emmanuel Adeyemi's death or the sale of the Bourdion Road property, Constance Owusu Boateng was to receive 3 million naira from the estate. At the bottom of the page was a table, 31 rows, one for each year of her service, each figure calculated in his father's hand, month by month, as an unofficial pension he had never formalized and had always intended to correct. He had been 32 years old when his father died. He had trusted the lawyers, the accountants, the administrators between them to do what was right. He had trusted incorrectly. The property was sold, he said. The property was sold, Pauline confirmed. She doesn't know about this letter. She doesn't know about this letter. He refolded it along its original creases and placed it in the inside pocket of his jacket, against his chest. Why didn't you bring it to her yourself? Pauline looked at him for the first time. Because what Constance needs isn't paper. Paper goes to court. Court takes years and money she doesn't have. She turned back to the canvas. She needs someone who loved her to do right by her. I was waiting to see if one would come. She had been waiting 3 years. Constance was back in her room by 10:30. She set the day's money under the mattress, sat on the edge of the mat, and opened Samuel's book, page N74, where she had stopped on Tuesday. She was on page 177 when the knock came. A woman in professional dress stood in the doorway, leather folder under her arm, a voice shaped by years of measured conversations. She introduced herself as Sola Nwosu, solicitor, with offices on Adamola Adetokunbo Crescent in Victoria Island. A client had engaged her this morning on a matter involving a document dated October 1, 2007. All costs would be covered by the client. Constance was under no obligation today except to confirm she was willing to proceed. Constance looked at her steadily. Tell me what document. The solicitor placed the photocopy on the small table beside the door and waited. Constance read it once. She looked up at the ceiling. She read it again. She ran her finger along the table of figures at the bottom. Each row, each column, each figure her employer had calculated by hand in 2007 and recorded and trusted someone else to honor. She pressed both palms flat against the table's surface the way she used to do at the end of long days in the Bourdion Road kitchen, pressing her hands against the cool wood while the house wound down around her. He wrote this in October, she said. October 14, 2007. She kept her hands flat on the table. Then she said, "What do I need to do?" The legal process took 4 months and 11 days. The estate's representatives, led by Adaise Bright, who entered the first meeting with the posture of someone anticipating a negotiation and left it with the posture of someone who had understood a different thing entirely, did not contest the letter. 2 independent handwriting experts authenticated it within 3 weeks. Emmanuel Adami's personal accountant, a man named Mr. Fashola, who had worked for the family for 26 years, confirmed that the pension table in the letter matched a private record he had kept at Emmanuel's instruction and disclosed to no one, a record he had been carrying in his own conscience for 5 years without knowing what to do with. The 2.3 million naira reached Constance Osu Boateng's Zenith bank account, the same account she had opened in 2004 on a Wednesday afternoon in June. The solicitor called while Constance was still at her pitch. She listened. She said, "Thank you." She went on standing until the last of the morning's loaves were gone. Collade had also filed a formal complaint requesting an audit of the estate's administration. The audit, completed in 6 weeks, found 3 additional written instructions from Emmanuel Adeyemi that had been documented and not actioned. One involved Tundi, the steward who had stepped back from the doorway. 2 involved pension allocations for other household staff that had been reclassified as discretionary during the restructuring. The findings went to the estate's remaining administrators and to the family's lawyers. By September, Adaise Bright had resigned from the estate's board of administrators. She cited personal reasons. The Lagos legal community, which is a smaller world than it appears, knew the full story within a week. The rest of the city learned it in 3. Collade Adeyemi announced the establishment of a domestic workers' pension trust, funded initially at 15 million naira and named in his father's memory, at an event covered by 2 national newspapers and a business television segment. He named the trust's first disbursement coordinator publicly, Constance Owusu Boateng, who 8 months earlier had been selling bread on Broad Street at 7:14 in the morning. The appointment letter was mentioned in the coverage. The story of the 45,000 naira left on the table was mentioned in the coverage. So was the name Adaise Bright, and the word restructure, and a table of 31 rows written in blue ink on a single page in October 2007. The comment sections of those reports ran to several hundred responses. Most of them were about Constance. Adaise Bright believed she had left Constance with nothing. She had sat at that table and placed the envelope on the wood and said the word restructure 3 times and believed the transaction was complete. What she could not see, because she had looked at the dress and not the woman, at the years as a liability instead of a record, was what Constance had carried out of that house in one bag. Samuel's novel with a name written in pencil on the inside cover, a red headscarf from Kumasi, a photograph of a boy not looking at the camera, smiling at something only he could see, and inside her, 31 years of knowing what people needed before they knew it themselves. A ledger mind so precise that nothing was ever lost. The memory of 1 minute taken in a kitchen in 2009, not 2, not 3, exactly 1, before returning to work. That minute belonged to her. No one had the authority to take it. You cannot erase what a person carries inside them. Not with an envelope placed face down on a table, not with a gate closed without ceremony, not with a word like restructure used as a door. The world has always had people who believe that removing someone from a room removes them from significance, that closing the account closes the account. But the accounts keep running. The truth stays true. And the day always comes when someone steps out of a car on a crowded street and recognizes with no warning and no preparation what they are actually standing in front of. Constance Owusu-Boateng sold bread on Broad Street in Lagos Island for 3 years and 2 months. She woke at 4:30 every morning and walked 3.2 kilometers and stood in the heat with her arms raised perfectly straight because she did not know another way to carry what she was carrying. She has a desk now on the second floor of a building on Adeniran Ogunsanya Street in Surulere, with a window that faces the road and a shelf where 12 novels are arranged in the order she first read them. Some mornings she arrives at 7 and sits in the quiet before anyone else comes in, reading through new applications with her reading glasses on and her pen in hand, the same pen she has used for 20 years, which is running low and which she has not replaced because it still writes. She still folds her house dress slowly before bed. Some things do not change because they do not need to. Here is the question I want to leave with you today. If someone gave 31 years of their life to your family, woke at 4:30, raised your children, stayed through illness and grief and every difficult Tuesday, walked out with one bag when she was asked to leave and left the envelope on the table because it was not the right number, and you discovered years later that she had been denied what she was owed while you were busy trusting that someone else would handle it, what would you do? Not eventually. Not with a lawyer as the first step. In the first moment, when you see her face above the bread tray and understand what has happened, what kind of person do you become? Leave your answer in the comments. I want to read what you say. Subscribe for more stories about the people the world walks past, the ones carrying more than anyone guesses, living on less than anyone should, and building lives that outlast every door that was ever closed on them. I'll see you in the next one.